The most terrifying place in the city wasn't a dark alley or an abandoned warehouse, but a luxurious walkway hidden behind fences, where the scent of jasmine once drifted to the night air and no one asked too many questions. In Brentwood, Los Angeles, there was a condominium people envied but rarely feared. It smelled of expensive cologne and freshly cut grass, stretched wide and unremarkable, just another affluent property on the edge of a sleeping city. For years, Nicole Brown Simpson passed through its gates, and on a June night in 1994, she never came back. What was left behind wasn't just a tragedy, but a puzzle written in red, a forensic map that pointed in one direction, while the world looked in another. When we think of June 12, 1994, we think of the white Bronco, we think of the glove, we think of the cameras, the celebrities, and the noise that swallowed the American justice system. But if you strip away the lawyers, the racial tensions, and the cameras, what remains is the silence of the physical evidence. The O.J. Simpson case is often remembered as a cultural moment, a referendum on police conduct and celebrity privilege. But beneath the spectacle, a different narrative was taking shape. It was a narrative told not by witnesses who could lie or police officers who could plant evidence, but by chemistry, biology, and physics. Today, we are walking past the yellow tape to look at what the jury struggled to see. We are examining the 61 drops of blood, the impossible timeline, and the invisible footprints that stamped a story into the concrete. We are looking at the forensic paradox that allowed a man to be liable in a civil court, but innocent in a criminal one, because in the end, the evidence didn't need to scream to be heard. It just needed us to listen, to understand the horror of that night. We must first understand the minutes that ticked away while the city slept. The prosecution argued the murders happened between 10:15 and 10:40 p.m. The defense pushed it later, closer to 11 o'clock, a time when Simpson had a visible alibi. But the most reliable witness that night wasn't a person. It was a dog. At 10:15 p.m., neighbors heard the plaintive wail of Nicole's Akita. It was a sound described not just as barking, but as a mournful cry into the dark. Dogs know when the atmosphere shifts from mundane to dire. That wail marked the moment the silence broke. Yet, there's a detail often overlooked, something almost mundane, a cup of Ben & Jerry's ice cream. Police found it melting on the banister inside Nicole's home. Based on the rate of melting, investigators pinned the timeline down to minute. Life was normal, until suddenly it wasn't. Simpson had a flight to Chicago that night. The window for him to drive from Bundy to his Rockingham estate, clean up, and get into the limousine waiting to take him to the airport was razor thin. It was a timeline that demanded perfection from a killer. And yet, even as the reports were filed and the timeline reconstructed, one final chapter that evening remained unwritten. The physical impossibility of being in two places at once clashed with the forensic reality found in the Bronco. Simpson had no bruises on his body, save for a cut on his finger, no scratches from a violent struggle with a young man like Ron Goldman. It seemed impossible, but once you looked at the chemistry, the impossibility began to dissolve. The human body contains about 10 pints of blood. On that night, a terrifying amount was lost, but the case against O.J. Simpson didn't rest on the pools of red at the crime scene. It rested on the drops that led away from it. There were 5 drops of blood found on a walkway at the Bundy scene. They didn't belong to Nicole. They didn't belong to Ron. They belonged, according to DNA analysis, to O.J. Simpson. The odds of that blood belonging to anyone else were calculated at 1 in 170 million. Then there was a Bronco. Blood on the driver's door handle. Blood on the instrument panel. Blood on the steering wheel. And finally, blood on the socks found in Simpson's bedroom at Rockingham. It was a trail of breadcrumbs that seemed to lead directly to the perpetrator. But the defense knew this. They knew they couldn't argue with the science of DNA. So they argued with the integrity of the vessel. This is where the case shifted from a murder trial to a conspiracy theory. The defense introduced a chemical called EDTA. It's a preservative found in laboratory test tubes, used to keep blood samples from coagulating. If EDTA was found in the blood stains at the crime scene, it would prove the blood came from a test tube, not a bleeding finger. It would prove the LAPD planted it. The FBI ran tests. They found traces of what looked like EDTA The prosecution argued it was background noise, environmental contamination. The defense argued it was the smoking gun of corruption. And then, the missing blood, the nurse who drew Simpson's reference sample, initially said he took 8 cc's. But only 6.5 cc's were accounted for in the records. Where did the missing 1.5 cc's go? The defense painted a picture of a road detective, creeping through the night with a vial of the suspect's blood, sprinkling it on socks and gateposts like a dark fairy tale. It was a story of systemic rot so deep it terrified the jury more than the murder itself. The shadows of doubt were taking shape, and they were long enough to cover the truth. In February 1995, the courtroom transformed into a stage. The prosecution made a gamble that would haunt them for decades. They asked O.J. Simpson to try on the bloody gloves found at the scene and at his estate. These were Eris Isotonic gloves, size extra large. They should have fit. But once those gloves passed the bar and reached Simpson's hands, something changed. We watched him struggle. We saw the grimace, the awkward tugging, the theatrical display of hands splayed wide. "They're too small," he mouthed. It was a moment that solidified the defense's mantra. If it doesn't fit, you must acquit. But let's look closer past the theater. These gloves were leather. They had been soaked in blood, a liquid that causes leather to shrink significantly as it dries. They had been frozen and thawed for evidence storage. They had been subjected to moisture and temperature changes that alter the very structure of the material. Furthermore, Simpson was wearing latex gloves underneath, creating friction. He was an actor, playing the role of his life, with a jury that was already skeptical of the props. The forensic reality was that the gloves were the correct size for his hands before the degradation of time and fluids took hold. But in the court of public opinion, the visual was absolute. The nuance of leather shrinkage was just background noise compared to the image of a man struggling to wear the killer's skin. It was a simple visual lie that defeated a complex, invisible truth. While the gloves took center stage, the floor beneath the victims held a secret that wouldn't be fully revealed until it was too late. The killer left bloody shoe prints at the scene. They were size 12. They were from a rare, expensive Italian brand called Bruno Magli. Only 299 pairs of that specific sole design were ever sold in the United States. When questioned during the criminal trial, Simpson was adamant. He called them ugly-ass shoes. He claimed he would never own such a thing. He didn't need to lie if he was innocent, but he was emphatic. The prosecution couldn't find a photo of him wearing them. The prints were there, orphaned in the blood, belonging to a ghost. Still, the verdict left an uneasy silence in its wake. Simpson was acquitted, but years later, during the civil trial, the past came rushing back. Photographs surfaced, not one but 30. Photos of O.J. Simpson walking through the end zone at a Buffalo Bills game and later at a casual event. On his feet were the ugly-ass Bruno Magli shoes. The exact style, the exact size. The forensic match was devastating. The tread pattern in the blood at Bundy was unique. The wear pattern on the shoes in the photos matched the biomechanics of how Simpson walked. But this revelation came when the criminal jeopardy was gone. It was a truth that arrived after the doors of the prison had already been locked from the outside. For years, no one connected the celebrity icon to the brutal footprints. But the camera lens had captured what the eyes refused to see. Why did the jury ignore the DNA? Why did they look past the blood trail? The answer lies in the hands of the people meant to protect it. The LAPD mishandled the crime scene in ways that are hard to comprehend today. Evidence was carried in pockets, not sterile bags. Swatches of blood were left baking in hot cars, degrading the DNA. A blanket from inside the house was used to cover Nicole's body, potentially introducing fibers from the suspect into the scene, or vice versa. The criminologists didn't change their gloves often enough. They walked through the blood. They created a scene where incompetence looked indistinguishable from malice. The defense didn't need to prove Simpson was innocent. They only needed to prove that the police were incapable of telling the truth. And in Los Angeles, in 1995, that was a story the jury was ready to believe. The systemic failure of the investigation provided the shadows where reasonable doubt could hide. The O.J. Simpson case remains a wound that never quite healed. It is a story of two tragedies: the brutal murder of two human beings and the brutal mishandling of the truth. The science was there. The blood spoke. The footprints walked a straight line to the suspect. But the message was lost in the static of a broken system. What do you think still remains unresolved in this case? Do you believe the forensic evidence was compromised, or was it simply ignored? Share your thoughts and theories in the comments. And if you want to explore more stories like this, stories that demand reflection as much as they demand attention, remember, subscribe and turn on notifications, because the darkest crimes don't end when the killer is gone. They end when we finally listen.